My role this morning is very limited, and it's to introduce Ronnie McFarlane, our Deputy Principal, and Casey Freeman, our Head of Middle School, who are going to present. They're leading the transition work at Brighton, and when we say transition, I think everyone said the same thing this morning. We're talking about a much broader sense of that, rather than just simply the transition of 7s and 8s into high school. I think we're talking about, in our case, certainly an opportunity for really significant impact across our school. It's a real opportunity and a catalyst for whole school change and improvement for us, and it's something that we really want to have as something that's sustainable as well as impactful. It's really important too at a strategic level that we have alignment and shared understanding, and I know in our school how Ronnie and Casey are working is very much working with and through other people. And so what we're presenting this morning is really the work they're leading out, but it's through working with our senior leaders, our leaders, our teachers, SSOs, our students and families, and also our local primary schools, who are really important partners as well. So we're focusing on 2022, as we all are, but I think the other thing is we're thinking much more about beyond. So we're thinking more and more about what is it that we're putting in place, not just for next year, but for it to be sustainable, ongoing, and as I said, have a really impact on our teaching and learning. So I'll hand over to Ronnie and Casey.
Thanks, Tony. I think it was really strategic of me to have a video that didn't work so that I could have you all after you've had another coffee and some food. So thanks to this team down here. I will start with acknowledging that the land that we meet on is the land of the Kaurna people. So I think that's a really critical point for us as emerging, and also obviously the interest in how other people are acknowledging their land that their school is built on. So we're really part of our transition, I guess, into becoming a new school of 7 to 12 is considering how we are adapting and transitioning ourselves to acknowledging different people within our community. Okay. In terms of our context, I think many of you would know of Brighton Secondary School. It's a very large school in the western suburbs. We are a Category 6 school with diversity, but not as complex as many we've already heard from. But in regard to that, we still have some challenges that emerge over the point of being a large school, and also some of the elements within that. So for our staff, we do have 30 leaders across our school, which has changed. We've got a large proportion of ancillary staff and teaching staff. And I'll go into a little bit more detail around how the capacity management plan has actually impacted our staffing and the nature of our staff. In terms of our students, currently we have almost 1,600 students, with a small proportion of ATSE community, a growing proportion of EILD students, a diminishing proportion of international education students, a flow program that we accommodate both on and off-site. And again, in terms of our student body, the majority of our proportion are in that middle quartile in terms of advantage, with only a small proportion in that bottom section. A few years ago, I was actually part of a process belonging to a different team over here that worked to decimate my own school, that it turns out when I joined Brighton Secondary School, because part of that role was looking for 7 high schoolers around capacity. So I was actually involved in that role in terms of identifying what is actually going to be a sustainable number of students to be enrolled at some of our larger sites. So what happened as a result was Brighton Secondary School came under capacity management, which also limited us in a range of ways. One, it limited us to 300 students a cohort to bring in. It also limited our special interest program numbers, which meant our out of zone, our proportion of students that were coming into the school from out of zone, and also our international program, which was then impacted again by COVID last year. But in terms of that, I think part of our focus around stretching and challenge every learners, when you know that you've got exactly the right number and that can lead into the structures that you put in place, is really important. So whilst the capacity management plan in some ways set some strong parameters for what we could do, it also gave us some opportunities. And that opportunities some of the challenges were around it raised the stakes of our local community. So if we had limited numbers coming in from out of zone, that meant for our special interest programs that those families were fighting really, really hard to get into the school, which places a lot of pressure on ancillary staff, on our families' engagement, people that already had students in our school. So those pressures are significant and still ongoing. But also it forced us to review what was working really well and what we valued around our school, and what we might potentially leverage for the programs that we did have, which meant those out-of-zoners were coming in, and which ones we didn't. It also reduced the number of primary schools that we had to interact with, because if you're not taking large amounts of out-of-zone students, then that reduces the number of school sites that you're engaging with. So that sort of takes me to these special interest programs. In terms of our context, we have 4 special interest programs across our site. Our special interest music program has been running for a significant period of time and is funded by the department as one of 4 special music interest schools. We have a volleyball program. We also have a Think Bright program and a Company Bright program for performing arts. So when I talk about the fact that our capacity management plan and this move of Seven High School gave us an opportunity to think a little bit differently, this was our previous leadership structure. So, and I'm not expecting you to read that text, but what that list over with that table shows is all the things that leaders were responsible for in our school. And those things were often events and organisational elements. And what it meant was that across our leadership structure, people were responsible in isolated areas of the school. What that meant was eventually everything ended up at the principal, because there wasn't really ownership over significant areas of leadership across the school. So what ended up happening as the school grew is that you weren't dealing with 1,250 student issues, but as you got up to over 1,700, they all ended up at the principal. Didn't they, Tony? Or me? did have hair prior? No. So part of our work in terms of thinking about, well, if we're going to move to a 7 to 12 model, what does it actually mean for our structures? So how might we address all of the elements that we know are going to make us successful in having young adolescents at our school, and how do we create structures and processes that will allow that to occur? So what we did was think about, just as we're thinking about our students, and it's been mentioned a couple of times about having small communities within big communities, we needed to create communities within our school structure and our leadership structure. So what that meant was previously, curriculum leadership sort of spread across, and no one line managed those people necessarily unless it was a PDP process. So underlining, like if I'm, as deputy principal, are going to be responsible for the teaching and pedagogy in my school, then I need to really work closely and build those middle managers in that role. If Casey's going to be working and being ahead of middle school, then we really need some structures and processes in underlying, and the structures in terms of the staff. Historically, our year level managers had a line release and not so much leadership responsibilities. So what that meant was when they communicated to our families, they talked about being responsible for uniform, behaviour and attendance. And what we really needed to shift to was, you're a leader of a community and culture within our site, so giving you leadership responsibilities for elements of those things. Again, with the senior school, we're thinking obviously about, and we're targeting the fact that we've got 7s coming in next year, but it provides us with an opportunity to think about, okay, what does the culture look like in our senior school as well? Our structure and organisation and our informed evidence, we created a role purely for data because we didn't use it really well. And if we're going to know our students and understand what we need to do for them, then we've got to get nitty-gritty with data to inform. Our school climate and our head of music, as head of music is a paid leadership role supported by the department as part of a special music interest school. So what we talked about was, well, if we've got these key areas, we've got curriculum and pedagogy, we've got sub-schools in terms of our middle school and senior school, the structure and organisation, the data and evidence and our climate people need to work across those. So how do we create vertical structures where we're working in teams, but also horizontal structures where we're supporting each other to do the work that needs to be done across the middle and senior schools. So what happens on the table is that we've got clear areas of leadership, clear responsibility lines, and hopefully we're reducing those because we want to delegate responsibility for a whole range of things. We've got line leadership in terms of we're developing the capacity of our middle school leaders, because as a large school, we must work through those people to achieve our goals. And then a bunch of stuff down the bottom, which is really just responsibility in terms of how we participate in a range of things that happen across our site. One of the other opportunities I think that Severn High School provides is an opportunity to think about our facilities. And for those of us really fortunate to get a significant amount of money to be able to do something with, that for us created an opportunity to change and shift thinking, to change and shift pedagogy, and to change and shift where people work together. Our site grew really quickly, and what that meant was people didn't have shared spaces. That already siloed learning areas became more siloed because now we had people working in different spaces across different areas of the school, sometimes fairly far apart. So initially when the school got the money, we thought about the aged facilities, but then the shift to thinking about how can we create a space within a really restricted land size to change the way that we think about young adolescent learning. How do we change it to make it somewhere where people can come together, that we're not separated by our learning, our faculties, and we're not separated by having to walk a long distance, and our students can become part of smaller communities within big communities. So we're really fortunate that the money that we received allowed us to refurbish a space which has been our first element of our middle school design, and we'll have this building emerging and being available in Term 4 this year. So part of, I guess, the challenge of moving and transitioning from a large school to an extremely large school is the approach to transition. So historically, when you're a school with significant amount of demand, you don't have to capture the imagination of your community because there is a demand to go there. And so that can lead to an approach which means that actually transition becomes an exchange, that it just becomes we give you this information and you come to us, and then we get you in the school and we enrol you. And I think part of that approach means that your transition is, when it's focused on an exchange, is not really a holistic one that considers the wellbeing and engagement and community as part of that process. So when I say our transition previously was really ad hoc, it meant that we had a learning support leader who was doing fantastic work with our local primary schools and identifying students with significant needs, really trying to understand those and prepare and plan for them. We had students in our international program coming in, well supported. We had students coming into our special interest programs who had opportunities, obviously, through auditioning processes and engagement and finding out about the program, and potentially having been at the school lots and lots of times because they were part of music, instrumental music, which is on site. But no one was really driving that sense of who do we want to be? Who are you as part of our community when you come to us? What does it look like to feel really comfortable about coming to our school? So transition in itself was really just the exchange of an enrolment. It was really focused on that finish line in terms of if we get there, these are the things that we need to do. And obviously there was that focus on our special interest programs. So a lot of our information that we distributed to our community was around how do you get in? Instead of how will you belong, how can we belong with you? Peer support though, one of the great things about historically at Brighton has been a fantastic peer support program. Our students are an amazing resource for us. And so when we have peers working with students in a range of ways, they are a real asset for us. So our peer support program and how they were involved with our transitioning students is something we are definitely enhancing and leveraging as we move forward. One of the critical things about shifting that perception of what transition is at the school is really about shifting to a value of valuing our expertise in our primary schools, what's already happening. It's also about parents being part of that conversation. So the difference between we're here to deliver information to you, to We want to hear from you about your child's experience and what we can do better. So we were less effective in listening and co-designing processes, and we're moving to, and you'll hear from Casey about how we're moving towards a more effective process of listening and engaging with our community, our students and our families. The other thing about our transition was a really isolated sense of responsibility. So we had a counsellor who wasn't a leader, just a counselling with line release, who was responsible for transition, which is a huge responsibility in one person and a data manager to take on that key role, especially when you're transitioning historically over 350 students into a school and next year 600. So moving in terms of our structure and looking at our middle school and having a Year 7 leader already on board is about thinking how a team can be involved with the transition of students and engaging the continuity of learning. So one of the things that was, I guess, a downside of having one person responsible for that significant amount of student movement and families is that many of our students at risk became identified, but it was well down the track. So what that meant is lots of missed opportunities. We have our site improvement goals are really clear 3 goals: stretch and challenge every learner, which has not necessarily been all the focus around our students, that every student gets stretched and challenged. Then we're going to look at our writing in context. So how do we make sure that students, as they progress through school, have the skills to be able to write in context in terms of their learning area and the expectations, especially around external SACE. But the other one was about belongingness or connectedness. So we have a huge focus on how do we make sure every student is connected, and we have invested in a leadership role around that as well that sits under our student culture team. So I guess for us, in terms of making sure that we have a supportive approach where every student is identified early, we've also got the aspect of data. How do we know our students before they come to us so that we can plan for, rather than react to, those students who are potentially at risk of disengagement, that have got complex home environments that still come to us, that might have wellbeing issues or the inability to engage with peers. One of the benefits of having a really, really large school is that often there are communities for every student, but if you don't have the structures and processes in place in terms of our extracurricular opportunities, clubs and activities, then they may not find that group of people they belong to until a long way down the line, where it's hard to then make them feel like they belong. So that's been a huge focus for us in terms of identifying what we didn't do really well before and how we can leverage the things we did do well to move forward into a new model of transition. The other focus of transition was that it was really focused on just students coming in. We didn't have a focus on students moving from year to year, that handing over of key information, because there was no structure around how that information would be transferred. But also, what does it look like from moving from year 9 into the SACE, or from year 11 into year 12, or from 12 out? So whilst 7 in a high school gives us a great opportunity to consider what does it look like in terms of our engagement with our local primary schools and how we can build continuity of learning for that group of students, it's also provided us with a lens to think about what is the continuity of learning for every one of our cohorts as they move through school, as they transition through. Who's on, the high ATAR pathway? Who's on VET pathways? Who's at risk of that transition between 9 and 10 when it starts to really hit the road? So that's how we are utilising, obviously, this opportunity in terms of 7s to think about transition, not only of our 6s and 7s coming in and the double cohort and all the logistical challenges that faces, but how we can look at that through the lens of our whole school community. All right, Casey.
All right, good morning, everyone. There's a real trick to this, isn't there? There we go. I'm just going to talk a bit about the transition process. what we've done so far this year and what we're planning to do for the rest of the year moving forward to make sure that our 7s and 8s coming in are ready to go. That's a profile of our transition intake for this year. So these are the kids that moved into Year 8 this year. We've got some really clear partnership schools. So Brighton, Glenelg and Paringa provide us with the majority of our students. Where we really need to put some thought into is that bottom school called Other. So that Other school is 40 different primary schools, and that is because a lot of those kids are coming into our special interest programs from outside of our zone. We also take students from private primary schools as well. So we have some really good connections with those partner primary schools that you can see up there, but we do need to do some work to make sure that those 70 students we don't miss out, especially moving into next year. I'll try stepping on it. So what we focused on this year with transition, like Ronnie mentioned, previously there was different components happening in the school. We had our learning support component who was our learning support leader doing their transition with those students. We had communication happening with our special interest programs and them almost running a separate transition program as well. What we wanted to do was move that into a real whole school approach so that we know that the families coming into our school have the right information, have the correct information, have the same information coming in. And also in regards to timelines, so we don't want, obviously we want opportunities for our volleyball kids and our music kids to get information about their programs, come and experience the school, but we don't want our students who aren't involved in those programs missing out on any experiences as well. We're in a lucky situation, I guess, where our families in our community, there's a real appetite for engagement. They want to be involved as much as possible. And we're trying this year to really focus on providing them with opportunities to do that in regards to parent nights and some other events that I'll talk about in a moment. And then communication as well. We're really trying to focus on, from that point at which we know which students are coming to us, having a really consistent stream of communication through the rest of the year to make sure everyone knows what's going on. The Knowing Our Students project it was great to hear Murray Bridges' work that they're doing in regards to collecting information on the students and then providing that information in a form that's useful for staff. We're looking at something very similar, so I'll be interested in having a chat later with the Murray Bridge crew, but one thing that we always have had is we have had data, we have had information from our primary schools. It has sort of sat somewhere. It's about collating that data and having it in a format that's easy for staff to use. So we're looking at a similar model where we develop, I guess you could call it a learner profile, which is largely a one-page document that staff can access and get a quick snapshot of the students they're teaching in their class. One thing about our students are largely compliant. So we want to make sure that our students aren't just sitting in class and the perception is they're doing okay because they are quiet, they're seemingly engaged throughout term one, and then the end of term one we find out that something's missing there. So we want to make sure we're on the ball from day one. We're looking at providing more opportunities for students to access our site. The feedback we've had from parents is that's really valuable. Even feedback from just tours that we've done early in the year. The students have really found themselves being able to see themselves in certain locations within the school, and some parents have even reported that just walking around the school with their child has made them feel a bit more at ease. So we're looking at more opportunities for our students to visit. What we really want this year is our peer leaders again, but also the home group teachers that are going to work with the students. We want them to be involved in the transition process as much as possible, and with the home group teachers that will likely be towards the end of term 4 once we have our staffing finalised. But we want the students when they walk into 2022 to see those familiar faces and have some connection with them from the year previous. The peer leader program, like Ronnie said, has been really successful. We're looking next year at having our year 11s again work with our year 8s, and we're going to use year 10s to work with our year 7s. Traditionally, our year 11s have received 10 SACE credits for that work. It hasn't been a subject on a line, but they have received 10 SACE credits. And we're just investigating ways how our year 10s might be able to do that peer leader work within the context of the PLP. And then, as I'll talk about in a moment, our focus doesn't complete at the end of term 4. We want term 1 to be still a real transition focus for those kids as well. Something we've done this year, which has been really useful on a number of fronts, is some school visits. So we recruited a number of our year 8s to go back to their primary schools, and they love that. They feel like celebrities almost. Everyone comes up to them. And basically what we did was we gave them a topic, a theme, and we just wanted them to talk about their transition experience. So we didn't give them too much more guidance than that. After that presentation that the kids did, there was an opportunity for some Q&A, and basically what we used was those questions, as well as the kids' speeches as well. We used that to, I guess, form some of the work moving forward. We found that really valuable information, the questions the year 6s and 7s were asking, but also what our year 8s actually thought of transition and what they got out of it. That's Ariane and Chelsea, just presenting to their primary schools. One thing that information is going to do for us is, like I said, inform our work moving forward, but it also gives us, I guess, a bit of the why to work with our staff. So we're changing some of our middle school structures. We're changing some of the way we deliver our curriculum. And a lot of the staff conversation is, well, why are we doing that? And a lot of that is coming from what the students are telling us, both in these visits and through other surveys as well. There we go. Like I said, we're in a lucky position where our families really want engagement. They really want as much communication and to be involved in our school as much as possible. To react to that, basically we provided more opportunities for tours and open days this year, and part of that was COVID. But we ended up having 4 separate open day events, 2 during the day and 2 in the evening, which were really well attended. And during those open days, we were able to focus on what we were doing with our middle school, but also we had a series of booths where parents could come and visit and learn more about devices or learn more about languages. And one of those booths was around transition and was specifically around the Year 7 to high school move. And it was probably the most popular booth. Parents were really, really keen to get as much information on how we were going to help their kids as possible. So that was really successful. We're continually getting information from our primary schools, particularly our main partner primary schools. The principals there are in a really good place where they're providing us information on what their parents are asking, what their parents are saying, how their kids are feeling, and we're doing some work in response to that as well. So part of that was some parent information sessions. So some of our partner schools asked if we can come and run a session for their Year 6 parents in particular, but also their Year 7 parents in regards to how we're going to manage the transition moves. So that's been really successful. And again, what we got out of that was some of the questions those parents were asking. Some of them were, we hadn't quite thought of that. And that can inform our planning moving forward as well. Our Year 7 leader did a great job in getting information out of our current Year 8s and their parents in regards to their experience with the transition. And that again gave us some information to work with moving forward. And again, we're in a lucky space where a lot of our kids that are coming to us have experienced the school already. They might play volleyball in the volleyball stadium on a Friday afternoon. They might come to us to do their music lessons. They might have come over to watch a drama performance or something like that out of hours. So that connection we want to expand on, and we want to provide more opportunities for those kids to connect even as earlier in primary school than we currently do. I'll get this right by the end, I'm sure. So just a little snapshot, and I have to press this multiple times, so this is a bit awkward. But the first 100 days of next year, we've done a bit of work on what that might look like, and it's definitely going to be, I guess, expanded and more thought put into that than previous years. It kind of starts without the students. We're going to spend week 0 spending some time with our staff on them understanding the kids that are coming into their classes. And part of that is around that learner profile that I talked about before. We want our teachers to obviously have worked with the kids the year before, but have as much information on where they're coming from, what skills are they bringing, what strategies have teachers used in the past, so that when they do start with those students on day 1, they know as much as they possibly can. Again, like many schools are doing, we're planning to have Year 7 and 8 students only on that first day of school. This year we ran a largely very successful parent-family morning tea that I think met COVID restrictions. And that was something for the parents. They get to meet key staff, they get to mingle amongst themselves, touch base with parents that the student might be sharing home group with. This year we had to ring a bell almost to get rid of them. They love hanging around. And it's also the start of something we're calling Welcome Week that I'll go into next. So next year what we're looking at doing is sort of quarantining week one and not having lessons for our students and really running a transition program. This year we did 1 day for our year 8s and then we launched them into their lessons on day 2. And the feedback we got was there's so much complexity, so much information to know and understand in regards to a big school that how can we do that better to set them up for the year ahead. So we are looking at running a day trip for our year 7s in lieu of a camp, but we are looking at running a year 8 camp, and then we'll look at what that looks like in future years. That's something that hasn't been done at Brighton before. We're looking at a lot of PE leader run activities. We're looking at introduction to all our technology, year level assemblies, home group challenges, house-based events. We're looking at some sort of passport challenge in regards to a tour of the site. We want the kids to be exposed to our clubs and activities, which is a big part of our school connectedness. So we're running an expo in regards to that, and then we'll have some wellbeing activities. The new building that Ronnie mentioned is a really special space, and what we want to do is spend some time with those students in week 1, basically teaching them how to use the space and what our expectations are in regards to the space, how they can access it, how it's basically going to be a safe space for them as well. We run a family acquaintance evening. The focus of that is around connection with the home group teachers. So we're moving to a model that a lot of schools either are or already do in regards to where their home group teacher will be teaching those students for a couple of subjects. So we want to make sure that that connection is there. It's something that our parents are telling us from our primary schools. They know who to contact at primary school. They're worried about who they need to contact at high school. So we're going to focus that evening around getting those introductions right for their home group teachers. Throughout term 1, we're looking at a focus on really early school connectedness, and that might be through house assemblies, it might be through sports day. It's going to be trying to expose the kids to opportunities outside the classroom. So an obvious one is, our sporting programs, our volleyball and music, but also those clubs and activities that I talked about. We're lucky, like Ronnie said, to have a great resource with our students. Many of our senior kids do run some of those clubs and activities, and we're looking to expand on that more next year. We're looking at, again, an opportunity for both the parents and the students in regards to sharing their learning at the end of term 1. Not something that has previously happened at Brighton, but we want, again, to have those parents on board and have the students be able to celebrate their learning that they've done in those first 11 weeks. We have our parent-teacher-student conferences towards the end of term 1, start of term 2 as well, another opportunity for the students and parents to touch base. Oh no, there we go. And we're going to provide opportunities for celebrations and acknowledgements, so award assemblies, recognising special achievements, which can often get lost in a big school, recognising things like birthdays with those younger kids as well. We did have a really impressive video. It was fantastic, but unfortunately something went wrong. So that video was around some student voice. So we had some interviews with our year 6s and year 7s that are coming to Brighton next year, and basically they gave some information on what they're looking forward to, what they're worried about and things like that. So there might be a way for us to share that down the track, but I assure you it's really good. Thank you. That's a bit of a snapshot of our transition process anyway, but I'm sure there might be some questions. Thanks.